Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, production designer Tamara Deverell, joins us to talk about their work on Nightmare Alley. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode. So make yourself comfortable as we jump into the conversation with Tamara. Joining me today is Oscar nominated, BAFTA nominated, Art Directors Guild nominated for excellence in production design in a period film, production designer Tamara Deverell. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, I appreciate you joining me today to talk about Nightmare Alley. It must be, how does it, I'm just going to jump straight in and ask, how does it all feel getting all this award recognition for your work?
I guess it feels great. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't, go into the film thinking about it, certainly. I just thought about doing the best job I could do with my amazing team of designers and carpenters and painters. So yeah, it's kind of, when you're not expecting something and you get this amount of attention from so many different angles, I guess I feel like I did something right.
But that's the thing, isn't it, though? I guess when you set out to make a film, you want to make the best product possible. But now it's all this sort of awards coming forward. And I think there was another one just this weekend, which is congratulations on winning as well. The name escapes me now, so I'm going to have a quick Google.
It was the Hollywood Critics Association.
There you go. I was going to say the exact same thing. Which is incredible. So hopefully that's the start of a winning streak for yourself.
Oh, hopefully.
But no. So I guess we'll go back to the beginning. How did the project land on your desk, and what is it that made you want to take the project on?
Well, I've worked with Guillermo for a number of years, starting with Mimic when I was art directing, and then I worked on a TV series with him that he was the executive producer, and he did the pilot. He directed the pilot called The Strain. And so I have a kind of a long-standing history, and I know what kind of director he is. And as a production designer, I think he's one of the ones that really it matters, the sets and the scenes and the storytelling through the art direction and design is very important to him. So he's a director that's definitely somebody most production designers I think would want to work with. He's also just, a very smart man who has such an extensive knowledge of just about everything, including art history and film history. And just, he's a bit of a walking encyclopedia and a real pleasure to work with, a real gentleman.
I guess when you work with people before, you get an idea of how they work and kind of an understanding. So I think you worked on The Strain, if I'm correct thinking. Yeah, because I remember watching that. I really enjoyed that show. And I guess when you do have somebody that you worked with before, you and you enjoy it, you want to take every opportunity as you can to, jump on any project that they have. I think as well, because this film is in two halves, should we say, there's the sort of carny side of it, and then there's the post-carny side. And I guess I want to start with the carny half of the film. Like when we're introduced to the world, it's like during the night, so it feels very kind of grimy and has that dirty underbelly, especially when you have Bradley Cooper's character jumping in and escaping from something that we don't know. We see a lot of reds as well when he first enters. And like, where did your research begin to create the look of the carnival, and how did the color palette and feel created in the research?
Well, color palette is very important to Guillermo, and we really worked, especially the red that you were mentioning, we really worked on honing that particular red. And so that was sort of happening at the same time that we were working on a lot of research. And, I wanted to honestly make it feel like a very much like a Midwestern United States 1930s carnival. So we did a lot of research in that realm, from the Library of Congress and from the Smithsonian, and there's a couple of books on banners that exist that we really used to our advantage. And I'm a firm believer in research, and I think, bringing, I really wanted to bring that carnival to life with the audience, and then embellish it with Guillermo's sensibilities in terms of color palette and style. Like the Funhouse was very much something that was his main kind of attraction, that he really wanted to have a particular, delve into the sort of sins and ideas of heaven and hell and the sin of mankind, and the character of Stan and what he's what he's facing in terms of his situation, which is as a sinner, quote unquote.
My favorite sort of setup as well is the House of Sin, where it's sort of like you're introduced to it very early on when they're chasing down the geek, and it just looks so incredible and so creepy at the same time, and it has that Guillermo del Toro sort of seal of approval on it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're sort of, it's a bit of a shame that it's shown during the night, because you don't get to show off the beautiful design of it all. But is there something, when you're looking in your research side of everything, it was a weird time in America with during the sort of end of the 20s and then sort of going into the 30s and everything. It's like, is there anything that you specifically wanted to look at, and or there's something that you specifically looked at in your research that you really liked, but then tweaked it with your design? Or does referencing a certain specific time era impact your design process?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, the method of building, even, like the lumber was different than, for example, a 2x4 piece of plywood was an actual true 2x4. I don't know how it is in England now, but in Canada and the States, they're no longer actually 2 inches by 4 inches. So like right down to that detail, we were building true to the period. And I think that just, the audience feels that. They feel the honesty of what we're trying to do. For the banners, which we did produce digitally, like we drew them on the computer. We had Andy Sang, our graphic designer, did the bulk of them. He kind of learned the hand. We bought a couple of banners that we had hanging in the art department so we could look at them. And we really studied them. And then we created them, on the computer digitally, but like hand painted digitally, and then printed them, and then had the painters paint over them, and then age them and paint them and age them and paint them. So, everything had that real flavor. We also shut down for the pandemic right after we had started building the carnival, and some of the structures were up. Some of the, we had dug the geek pit. We had completed the design and we were laying it out. We'd hung some banners, and then we stopped for about 5 months. So it did have a happy weathering effect on the carnival. I don't know if that answers your question, but there's one banner maker who's famous in the States. His name is Fred Johnson, and I kind of call him the Picasso of the banner world. And we were looking a lot at his work, and even his style as it progressed from the 30s to the 40s to the 50s, which was his active period. And I became like a historian for Fred Johnson in a way. And those were the banners that we had in the art department, were some of his that, I felt privileged to have those.
Oh, that's cool. But I guess having been shut down for the pandemic, kind of added to your design and aged the banners and everything, sort of having them exposed to the elements, should you say? You're sort of, I guess that'll help a producer as well, knowing that you've just cut some costs by doing that as well. So that's probably quite handy. But as well with designing banners, because during the day they are a really beautiful sort of red and yellows that have that sort of circus feel. Is there as well with colors, was there like a with color palette as well, was there something that you guys wanted to be strict on to sort of, I guess, show that sort of duality in the film?
Yeah, I mean, in the carnival, we weren't, except for the use of the red in the geek pit, we were just following more the carnival color palette from, which was triggered by looking at the actual banners. We were very specific about the red and the white of the geek tent, for example, the pickle punk geek tent, and then Zena's tent was yellow and blue. And we had many conversations and did a lot of testing of dyeing the fabric and then aging the fabric to get those right. I mean, we did sort of do specific color codes for different characters. We also worked a lot more than just color, the whole circle theme, which was sort of in my mind, and I think also in Guillermo's, this idea of Stan being trapped in a circle. So we did have a theme of the geometric nature of the circle. So we had it in the geek pit, and then in the fun house, he goes through sort of a barrel tube and then into this eye room, which is all circles. So there's circles within circles within circles, which become his cage in a way. And then we see it again in the high society portion. So thematically, we were quite consciously, but not overtly, working with these geometric forms, especially circles and arches and long and narrow spaces, alleys. We were forming in the carnival, we were forming alleys with the tents in the back area, when he runs to chase the geek, we called it Tent Alley. Everything had an alley in it. So that also became a theme, an architectural theme.
Once you sort of start mentioning things about the circular designs and alleys and everything, yes, things start sort of clicking in my mind more as well. And seeing what was to lead on to the sort of the second half of the film, by having that sort of design theme of the circular nature, it's starting to click more in my mind with the shot setups, and now thinking about how everything's been brought to life in that scene, especially in the first half and then in the second half. Before we jump into the second half of the film, I read during another interview that you received biographies of characters. So now I can imagine that these read very differently to a script, because with a script you kind of have a slight idea of what characters are like, but once you get sort of bios, they really sort of flesh out in the mind of who these people are. So did these bios help when it came to designing certain sets? Once people were cast as well, did that change your mindset as well for designing?
A bit of both. Certainly the bios came after the characters were cast. And Guillermo wrote these bios and gave them to, I think, both the actors and all the department heads. And they were, for me, they were so helpful. They were really essential to breathe life into the characters' environments. For the David Strathern character, Pete, for example, it gave his likes, his dislikes, his past history. We created, I don't know if you watch the film very closely, we created under the stage, we created posters of him when he was, main stage act in the big city before he became a carnival act and an alcoholic. So really very much the bios gave me meat to work with, even though they weren't necessarily things that ended up in the film that you would see, you would notice. It just gave us all the detail. Like Molly had an obsession with shoes, and Molly liked birds and chocolates, and we put all that stuff in her caravan. And but more than that, more than it just actually like dressing the sets around them, it actually gave me a feeling for the characters. And we work very collaboratively as storytellers. So every one of us needs to be telling the story of those characters, if you know what I mean. So the bios were essential. In terms of the cast, I mean, I certainly got to know some of the cast, like Bradley, because he was one of our producers and was involved heavily creatively in the film. But like for Kate Blanchett, who's an actress I really admire, I felt very in tune with what how she would portray the character, although she's never portrayed a character like Dr. Ritter before. And just as a woman who's a strong force in the 1940s, when women were, didn't have the luxury of that, being strong characters. That was inspiring to me to create her space, for sure. And just the way Cate Blanchett moves, and thinking about her moving through the set and that kind of thing.
You've literally created a beautiful segue to the second half of the film, which takes place with a time jump a few years later, and they're based in the city. Now, changing sort of was there an idea that you were mentioning before that the whole sort of carnival had that sort of Midwest feeling, especially with the wood and everything? When you're moving it, when it moves towards a city, was there a city in mind that you had when you started designing and creating spaces? And were there certain landmarks that you wanted to use as reference to create these spaces?
Well, the city that the film actually takes place in, that we actually shot in, is Buffalo, New York. And I would say that Buffalo was very, very much a part of the look and feel of the film. As we scouted it early on, we purposely scouted it very early on, and it has an amazing array of Art Deco architecture. The City Hall where we shot being one of the most amazing Art Deco features of the city. And we saw a lot of spaces there that we didn't film in, that were really, really informed me. Like, I was taking pictures of Art Deco details in the Hotel Lafayette, where we didn't end up shooting. From the telephone booths, they have period Art Deco, or period telephone booths, not necessarily Art Deco, although it's very Art Deco building. That formed a lot. I was looking at a lot of Art Deco in New York. Lilith's office was specific to a study that's in the Museum of the Brooklyn Museum, that I had seen, that I showed Guillermo pictures of, and I'd seen it years ago, and I'd always admired it and really wanted to build something like that one day. And this seemed to be the golden opportunity, and it seemed to be right for the character as a woman, not to do the brass, gold, marble, hard-edged metal look that Art Deco is known for. So I looked at that. I looked at Eltham Palace, which is outside of London. I don't know if you've heard of that. I was looking at that a lot for Lilith's office. It's a palace. It's a big house, a palace, I guess, and it's all got art. It's got art. It's very Art Deco, but it's got inlaid wood. It's all inlaid wood. And I was kind of, after I looked at the Wild Wargate study at the Brooklyn Museum, I started looking at different inlaid woods historically, and that was one of the places. And so I always like to come at design from a point of research and reference, and then find something that we can sort of look at, show a director, and then go wild. I mean, Lilith's office looks very different from the original study that I was referencing. But I did take time to talk to the curators of the Brooklyn Museum, for example, to find out exactly what kind of wood was used for the wood inlay and for the lacquer panels that are part of that particular museum piece.
You mentioned it before, that the office, instead of going for that sort of cold look, it's gone for more, I don't know, it's just more of a smoother, sophisticated, powerful, maybe not sophisticated, but seductiveness of an office. Mm-hmm. That, with Lilia being a psychiatrist, she basically sort of gets people to she helps people, but then also at the same time doesn't, with all the recording devices. And when you have to build these little secret drawers and panels where she has to pull out a recorder, and also these sort of buttons, how difficult is that to add into the design process?
Yeah, I mean, if that was technically a very difficult set to build, because of all the panels and the buttons and the working parts and the recording device moving, and the opening and closing of the panel doors and the safe, and Guillermo wanted to shoot through the safe, and there was a back door that was curved, there was a bathroom door that was curved, and the front doors when they opened it. So I mean, technically, for our carpenters It was the best of our master carpenters were building that set. And really, literally, as we were building it and getting closer and closer, every day I'd go in and open the drawers and close the drawers repeatedly and say, guys, we got to make this smoother. And we would work it and work it and work it. The bookended inlaid wood panels that looked like sort of Rorschach, symbols, whatever, Rorschachtian faces and things. Those were sort of a happy accident. I mean, I knew that was going to happen when we were playing around, like we do a lot of tests first, and we were playing around with the inlaid wood. I didn't know that they would be so like appropriate to a psychiatrist's office in that sense. And we actually, there were a couple that didn't work out, and we carefully had to cut them out and redo them because there was one above the door that was just not quite perfect enough. And I don't know, it wasn't like we were specifically looking for anything or Guillermo was asking for anything with those, but it just, once we started putting them up, with just me and the construction coordinator, Mark Kutenbauer, changed a couple because we weren't happy with them. They weren't classy enough, I guess. But it was a very, building her office was a really marvelous experience for everybody, but one of the most technically difficult sets I think I've ever built. And that includes like sets that I've built for Star Trek where they're they're maddeningly complicated and with automatic doors and things. Doing it for real, because this is all for real, this is all handcrafted and nothing's automated. Like there were no police systems, there was no clever tricks that we could do. It had to just work smoothly and seamlessly time and time again.
With all these secret compartments, as you're saying as well, you're just testing by pulling out the drawers to make it as smooth as transition as possible. It's like these are the sort of things that sometimes as an audience viewer you don't really think about, that those simple tasks of just opening a drawer seem normal to us, but when you're recreating it and want to make it look cool for the screen, it's sort of like the painstaking detail that people put into all of it.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I mean, really, I have to give full credit to my amazing carpenters. And we test everything, so it's not just the final product of the finished set. It's just, we contemplated different looks for the flooring. For her office, we were going to do carpet, we were going to do tile, we ended up doing real marble, which sounds very fancy, but it's actually probably cheaper than trying to paint marble, which we often do in film. And to have we were so close to that floor and just wanted that gloss and that shine and that reflection, especially Dan Lauschton, our DP, who did an amazing job lighting it. And for me, it was like the sound of Dr. Lillis' heels clicking across the floor. Like, you're just not going to get that if you fake it. I mean, in Grindel's office, which was the other big Art Deco set we did, we faked the floor. It was actually digital marble and painted panels kind of blended together. And I think that worked for that set. I think it was all about that, the big wide shot of Stan in the chair, and this incredible lie detector that we also custom built was also a very tricky build. So, and his office was more about metal and glass and reflection and Art Deco, bas reliefs and that kind of thing.
This leads to my next question as well, because there's the garden that is created in the film, the garden set, that's created in the film. I was reading somewhere that is very sort of parts of it created with visual effects. Now, when you're designing something I guess this will be something that changes once you find location, but does your designing factor in what visual effects is able to create when you're on certain locations, or do you just go with what you have in your mind to create?
Well, for the garden, I actually propose, often what I'll do is I'll start with an illustration in conversation with the director, with Guillermo, about for the garden, for example, which was an existing garden, beautiful Art Deco garden that we did do some work for. But my first sort of go-to was to to Photoshop the house into the garden, because the way that garden is in real life is it's just a forest. There's no house. There is a house, but you don't see it. So I did that, and that sort of seemed to stick with Guillermo, that his house would be there above the garden. So that was VFX. So that's very much hand in hand with Guillermo, with Dennis Berardi, our VFX supervisor, who's a great talent as well. And then the garden was an existing garden that we had, Guillermo knew about. I've shot there before. It's outside of Toronto in a smaller city called Oshawa. And we had to certainly do a number of things, building gates. And then the back part of it, we actually did in a back lot where the car is for all the stunt work, because we couldn't shoot it there. It was a residential neighborhood and right outside the gates. So we were replicating parts of it, and we were embellishing parts of the little mausoleum sort of building at the end of the garden. It's a ice cream stand or something normally, and so we completely embellished that and built the statue in there. That's sort of the statue to his long lost love. And Guillermo has, like, having worked with him before, he has this penchant for things. So the burlap wrapped trees was something we added. I don't know what it is about these burlap wrapped trees, but he's really obsessed with them. we did a lot of that on the strain when I worked with him, and I think it's just the idea of these constrained organic shapes. They're kind of mummified trees in a way, that's very Del Toro. So we did a fair bit of that. I mean, the garden's a garden. We did a lot of snow dressing. Our special effects team had to, even though it was winter and it was snowing, the snow would come and go, and we would come and go as a film unit. So they were having to put snow in or take snow away depending on the weather.
No, that's really cool to hear, and also sort of like the adding of details of like the tree, and also like the idea of using certain space to create what you want to create. That 1 month that's just a back lot with an ice cream stand, and then the next you guys are creating this whole sort of garden setup and putting snow in and everything. That's the sort of stuff that always that's the sort of stuff that always blows my mind of what could be created on a film set, and how and what that could be created from it all. I also read at one point, I know this has been released now, but there were discussions of the film being shot in black and white. There's screenings happening now, I know in the UK, with Nightmare Alley being screened in black and white. If it did go ahead being shot in black and white, how would that change your design? How would that affect your design process?
That's an interesting question. I mean, we did talk about doing it in black and white originally, and actually Dan Laushton, our cinematographer, was adamantly against it. I think it would have changed things for me. It would have been a very different process. I'm glad that Guillermo made the film into black and white. I haven't seen it yet. I'm quite excited to see it. And it's a definite nod to film noir. And I think because of Dan's lighting and he does a fair high contrast. I mean, he did do a lot of film noir lighting, especially in the high society portion in Lilith's office and stuff. So I'm sure it translates. I mean, I've seen the black and white photos of it. I'm sure it translates really well. I think I've just finished another project with Guillermo, which is an anthology series for Netflix called Cabinet of Curiosities. And one of the shows we shot in black and white. Now, these are different directors. Guillermo curated a sort of a list of mini movies that he wanted to do for this series. And we decided to shoot one, which is Graveyard Rats, a period one that's set in the 1920s, 1930s, in black and white. And it was a very different experience for me. Like, as a designer, we did a ton of camera tests and just trying to figure out the tone and the tone of the costumes with Louis Sequeira, who's the same costume designer we had on Nightmare Alley. It was a very different process. The lighting, everything, very different. So I think if we'd gone in shooting it in black and white, it would have been such a different, like reds especially, which, Guillermo is very into the type of red and the very specific the reds that we chose. Reds completely change when you shoot them black and white. So I'm very curious to see it because, there's a lot of texture there that I think both in the carnival and in the high society part of the film that would translate well into black and white, and the lighting. But for my work, it would have been a very different experience.
Red shows up a lot darker in black and white because they had that problem on Psycho. I think the famous story of when they were shooting the first shower scene, and they used sort of like chocolate sauce rather than anything red because it just didn't come out properly on camera. Which is always like a fascinating little tidbit, how important color is in film, and if it's black and white, how important it is to use the right color for it to be translated well on screen.
Yeah, for sure. We actually did the same tests as the Psycho tests on this recent show, and had to use chocolate for blood. Like red just it doesn't, and greens are odd, and grays become greens, and everything shifts. I think it would have been I think it would have ruined my process for Nightmare Alley because I work so much with color. I'm glad there's a black and white version, but I think I would have just struggled endlessly trying to make it in black and white. I mean, there was sets in this recent show that we did with Guillermo. There was one set, this underground tomb, that we actually painted just in grayscale with no color. I mean, there were some bones in it that were colored, and there were some other elements like vines that we used as roots that came as brown, but the actual set, which was all stonework, we painted just in black and white. Interesting process. I could talk endlessly about it.
I'd love to hear more about it. I think this is a bit cheating, but when the next show comes out, maybe I can get you back on to talk about it, and we can go through it there. So it leads me to my last question, and this is more just for fun. Linking back to the sort of first half of the movie, the carnival and everything, what would have been your favorite thing to do at a carnival if you went to visit one?
In the 1930s or now?
Let's go with both. I'm gonna cheat and say both.
Well, the fun house that we built was, everything moved in it. The barrel moved, the floor in the eyeball room moved, the eye moved. And when we as we were building it, as we got closer and closer, and we had a bunch of other moving parts that you don't see in the movie, I just wanted to keep going through it. And the special effects guys had to, they had to operate everything. So I was like, I was like a little kid, let me go through it one more time. I couldn't wait to show Guillermo, and like we had stairs that did this, so it really kind of brought me back. And I loved the carousel that we got, which was an actual 1930s carousel that we had to refurbish because somebody had made it like a disco carousel in the 1970s or something. So we lovingly hand painted every horse. I loved to me, that was the most romantic, magical thing, is to ride around in the carousel when we finally got it working. And, we had to rebuild it so that it had stability because we had to put cameras on it for the scene, and we had to have dolly track beside it. So it wasn't just a simple turn it on, which we could have done. It would have just been too wonky for us. But the carousels are magical, and I had, just the process of redesigning that and improving it, but having something that was concrete that we could actually work with was so lovely. That answer to your question.
I think it does. I think we have a mixture of experience on the film and what you like as well. I think the idea of the carousels your answer of the carousel, is kind of like the cherry on top of this interview, just because carousels they are so much fun. And on this film as well is where you see the sort of love story entangle, and there's always something a little bit more magical about them, and especially in this film with how it's lit and how it looks as well.
Yeah, really beautiful.
Tamara, thank you so much for today. Nightmare Alley is now streaming in the US on HBO Max and on Hulu, and I think it's still in cinemas in the UK, but I'm sure it will be going to streaming very shortly. Thank you again, Tamara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.